I'm currently joined by my guests, Dr. Tara Karta, former Director, National Security Council Secretariat. I also have Brahma Chilani, Strategic Affairs expert. I also have Glenn Carl, former Deputy of National Intelligence Officer for Transnational Threats. A very warm welcome to all of you. Let me start by asking you, Tara Karta, this meeting between Prime Minister Modi and Elon Musk, how do you view that?
I mean, come on, he's the guy, right? He's the person who's with Trump. So, I mean, that's a big deal for us. Yeah, he's the man of the moment. So, and you know,
but
honestly,
what are the implications that you're looking at? What are the implications that you think that we should look at, especially with this particular meeting?
See, he hasn't in the past, he's not against skilled workers H-1B visas. That's one thing. I mean, that's what he said earlier in December, I know. I don't know how this is going to pan out later. Number two, his Tesla factories dropped sales in China by, I think, 11.9%. Right? So he's looking at other markets. Eventually, I'm hoping he'll come to India. Let's hope that works out. It works out for both parties. But on a more, what shall I say, on a more statesmanship platform, this man is really, you know, he's changing the face of the US bureaucracy. He's chopping things. I just saw a tweet of his saying Reuters was funded by a certain, you know, US agency from the deep state, all that. He's making waves. And he wants to change things. A lot of things that he's looking at aligns with what we are also looking at. You know, in terms of the China factor, in terms of getting a lot of already the private defense to defense, the partnership is growing. I mean, you've got a bunch of innovators from our country going there. This is all to the good. And Elon Musk signifies that. That is what he stands for.
Right. Brahma Chilani, sir, you know, this is a very interesting situation at the moment. Elon Musk is not just a businessman. He's not just a billionaire at this moment. He's also very much part of that government. And in that particular context, how do you see this meeting? How do you see the transaction between Elon Musk and Prime Minister Modi and India in general?
Well, the relationship with the US is the most important relationship for India. It's critical to India's economic and military security. It's critical to India's international image too. As far as Elon Musk is concerned, forget about the man. Look at what he is doing. He's downsizing the federal bureaucracy. He's helping to weed out fraud and corruption. We should emulate that example. In India, we have a bloated bureaucracy that weighs down India. The bureaucracy is a hindrance to India's growth trajectory. And that bureaucracy in India has become even more bloated over the years. So what Elon Musk is doing is an example for other countries. And it's also part and parcel of what Donald Trump promised during his campaign. He promised reforms. He promised to clean the corruption in Washington, D.C. He vowed to downsize the bureaucracy. So Trump is a man in a hurry. Age is not on his side. So Trump is in a hurry to build a powerful legacy before his time is up. That is the only explanation why in 3 weeks he has shaken up Washington. Finally, there's somebody in Washington who's able to shake up the system. And he's also gone after the deep state and its institutions. He's gone after all of them, including the CI. He's trying to downsize the CI. They have the funding freeze by the Trump administration is also affecting deep state institutions like the National Endowment for Democracy, which has been involved in regime change operations from Ukraine to Bangladesh. All these things are good. These are good for the US, good for the US to revitalize its power, good for the US to arrest its relative decline. It's also an example for countries like India.
Absolutely. Mr. Glenn Carl, we have been speaking about this earlier as well. India, it enjoys a position where it has friendly relationship with the United States. It has cordial relationship with Russia as well. And I want to understand from you, how can India in this particular situation can balance its relationship with these nations, especially with the United States and Russia at the same time, and while maintaining its strategic autonomy?
Well, India is becoming ever more able to do exactly this balancing act as India becomes progressively more powerful. I mean, India has always been the champion of the non-aligned movement, and loudly stating, or loudly is too pejorative, strongly stating that it wouldn't be aligned with either the West or the East. And then it's very apparent for anyone who visits India that the emotional ties to Russia from the time of independence up to today remain strong. I think stronger than the reality would call for, but that certainly seems to be the case. So India can ever more effectively maintain this position. The change in the equation in the last several weeks, of course, is that Donald Trump is far more transactional and a mercantilist than his predecessor, or any American predecessor for 100 years, probably. And so he will be more demanding that in order to acquiesce in Indian purchases of Russian oil without making any sort of stink about it, perhaps India would be well advised to buy some American military equipment, or to make a deal on pharmaceuticals or a Tesla factory and so on. So it'll be more transactional, and he'll seek to Trump, to balance the balance of trade, the market trade rather than financial. And otherwise, India is in a progressively strong position, frankly.
Having said that, Mr. Kal, what are the potential risks here, and what are the potential challenges associated with India's, diplomatic efforts, and how do you think can they be mitigated at this moment?
You're asking?
Oh, the risks are for the long time. Is that for me? I'm sorry.
Yes, Mr. Kal, go ahead.
Yeah. The risks are long term. That to be a free rider in what has been, on the whole, normative, rules-bound international trading system and diplomatic system will start to undermine itself. If you don't uphold the norms, then they will fray. Now, that is possible for a major power like Russia or India or the United States, but the costs ultimately in rules, and then in slowly growing corruption in trade deals and so on, are real. But for the foreseeable future, India is in a good position, I think, frankly, where it can be essentially a free rider on what remains of the Western normative system and benefit from bilateral deals with whoever it wants to make them with.
Absolutely. Dr. Tarakartha, India has been growing, and it has been growing steadily for some time. How can India leverage its economic growth and at the same time development to promote regional and global cooperation, especially with countries like the United States?
Okay, that's a tough question because, the US, biggest trade partner, US, China, sometimes US, sometimes China. That's a reality. You want to grow, you have to have trade with the US. But the trouble is, in that case, you also need to sustain BRICS. And you also need to sort of be around SEO in a way, kind of way. So I'm not at all sure that President Trump is going to like that. To me, it seems, I'm sticking my neck out here, that the word strategic autonomy to President Trump will be like a red rag to a bull. he's not going to like that kind of thing from India. I mean, as long as you do your Indo-Pacific, all that stuff, that's all very well.
And
But
in
do
fact,
it.
it's a tricky situation too, because Donald Trump, he has in fact threatened to impose a 100% tariff on BRICS nations, and that also includes India. So yes, please go ahead.
Yeah, so the de-dollarization is rubbish. That's not, we are not going anywhere with that. So that is not an issue. But there is also another, the problem is that you can, what can we do to, India's been terribly proactive on tariffs. We've sort of, before anything could happen, you've rolled back one entire slab of stuff. And, to make sure that he doesn't, this is, let me emphasize, this is a working visit. It's not a state visit in that sense. It's a thing to get work done. And that is what Jaishankar was doing in Washington. That's what the bureaucracy has been doing all this time. To some extent, we've got where we want. But the fact remains, now this is the problem. We still are dependent on Russia.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
You cannot walk away from the fact that we need those spares and we cannot afford to buy a bunch of that stuff. Number two, you've just bought about 10 billion euro worth of stuff from France, right? You think President Trump is going to say, how about spending at least double that here? So there is a limit to what you can buy from outside also. The economy is doing well, but you've got problems, in terms of your balance payments and etc. We can't go on doing this. And the third and final factor is China's your neighbor. There is no getting around that. There is a problem.
Yeah.
So that's why the very tightrope walking is required, which I think Foreign Minister Jaishankar is more than capable of carrying out. But still, it's pretty tricky.
Mr. Chilani, speaking about conflict resolution, I want to understand from you India's diplomatic response, its expertise. Do you think it could help resolve conflicts or disputes between nations? We have seen the Middle East war that has been going on for some time. We are seeing what is happening in Ukraine. Do you think India is in a position where they can promote peaceful resolutions, and that can also be a part of that discussion with the US President?
India tried to play the role of an honest broker in the Ukraine war when Modi went to Kyiv and to Moscow in an effort to broker a ceasefire. But Washington wasn't interested at that time. This was last summer.
Yeah.
In June, July, he went to Kyiv and to Moscow because the Biden administration not only was not interested in a ceasefire, they had shut the door to diplomacy with Moscow. So making the role of an outside player like India important, because only a country like India, which has good relations with Moscow and with Washington, could play a role in ending that conflict. But now, President Trump has directly engaged with President Putin. The two sides don't need an outside party. They are negotiating between themselves to end the war in Ukraine. So this is good news for the world because the entire world has been affected by the Ukraine war in some form or the other. For example, the rise in fuel prices, the rise in food prices all relate to this Ukraine war and the sanctions on Russia, the unparalleled sanctions on Russia. Russia was, before the war, the world's largest exporter of energy, the largest exporter of wheat, for example. So these sanctions on Russia have disrupted global supplies in several areas. But as far as India is concerned, I don't think India is a free rider, has never been a free rider. Also, in terms of India's weapons purchases, we should not forget that India today, and for a number of years now, has been the world's largest importer of weapons. World's largest importer of weapons, India alone accounts for nearly 10% of the global trade in arms. India is a relatively poor country.
Yeah.
This kind of import dependency that India has failed to wean itself off from is not good for India's military security or its aspirations to be a world power.
Yeah.
And also important to bear in mind what Tara Karta said, that, we're dependent on Russia for spares. Yes, for spares. But in terms of new weapon systems, if you look at the last 10, 15 years, we are no longer buying major new weapon systems from Russia, in a big way. In fact, we have turned to the West. All the big, the major, the largest number of big deals have been with the US and with France. The US has become, in terms of new arms deals, the biggest supplier of weapons to India in the past decade. Just a few months ago, under President Joe Biden. And by the way, under President Biden, the US-India relationship took a hit. It began fraying. Because several differences and disputes came to the fore. Despite that, in September last year, India signed a $3.5 billion drone deal with the Biden administration. I wish we had kept that deal for the Trump administration. Trump would have been very happy with that kind of big arms deal with India.
Yeah.
But we gave it to Biden, whose presidency wasn't good for the US-India relationship. In fact, Trump's first term was the best period in US-India relations since India's independence. That was the golden period. That was the period when the relationship thrived in all areas. And that's a period when US policy took executed fundamental shifts in its policy towards India's two main regional adversaries, China and Pakistan. Trump, in his first term, ended the 4-decade-long American policy of aiding China's economic rise and identified China as a threat and an adversary. On Pakistan, he cut off all security assistance to Pakistan for its refusal to break its links with terrorist groups. So that was the period when not only those policy shifts happened, India was given the pride of place in Trump's Indo-Pacific strategy. But then came Biden, and the relationship came under pressure. So hopefully now, with Trump back in the White House, the US-India relationship can be restored.
That is a fascinating assessment there, Mr. Chilani. Tarakarta, would you like to weigh in on that? The kind of relationship that India enjoyed during Joe Biden's presidency and US President Donald Trump's presidency, how do you assess that, and how different are these two relationships?
See, I agree partly with what Brahma says. I mean, he's raised some excellent points. Trump did set that whole course towards the Indo-Pacific, which was one of the biggest shifts for us. I mean, just it was not just renaming it as from Indo-Pacific to the whole Indian Ocean, the emphasis, and with India there. It's a question of budgeting. It was a question of prioritization. It was a question of defense deals. A lot of things happened indeed. But the thing is, if you recall, he also made 3 separate mediation efforts to Pakistan on Kashmir. Yeah. I mean, I remember nearly falling out of my chair in shock when I was in government, because nobody expected that. So the fact that he's a little, difficult to understand which way he'll go is a problem. And I'm hoping that this set of visits, you had the DNI coming and calling on him, you got the Elon Musk calling on him. I'm hoping all this presages a good Trump-Modi meeting. You can never tell. So I believe that he knows what he wants. And one constant I want to point out, in US policies, they don't like competitors. So therefore, whether Trump transacts with China on certain things or not, China will remain a very serious competitor to US, and they are not going to like that. Right. So that is a given. But having said that, will they then ask you to do more on China? I'm not sure how we're going to do that. So it's a bit of a cleft pick.
Okay. In the meanwhile, these are the pictures that you can see on your screen of Prime Minister Modi meeting Vivek Ramaswamy. Glenn Carl, the US President Donald Trump, he has been surrounded with interesting faces, let me put it that way. including like Mr. Vivek Ramaswamy. How do you see this particular meeting? Because Indian community there in the United States is one of the largest workforce, and Prime Minister Modi meeting Vivek Ramaswamy there. How significant is that according to you?
Well, I think maybe distance makes the heart grow fonder. And since you're all a long way away from Washington, things seem rosier than they do only a few hundred kilometers away from where I am. Ramaswamy is a very intelligent, outspoken character who draws attention by speaking loudly and often outrageously. Obviously, he's Indian American, so politically, it's an astute step for Modi to take to meet someone who can be viewed as a success story for the Indian American community and a link to Indian Americans and to the now dominant Republican factions in the Trump administration. But I think in all of the discussions I've had, Indian experts tend to overestimate the impact and the weight of the Indian American community in the United States and politically, certainly. It's true that they have a very welcome but disproportionate influence given their size and the overall population in the high-tech industries, for which America should be profoundly grateful. But beyond that, they are not an especially powerful faction, although they are a growing one in the Republican Party, since the Indians tend to be socially conservative in the United States, and I think probably in India too, for that matter, just in general from an American perspective. So it's an astute political step for Prime Minister Modi, but beyond that, it's making nice to the new Trump administration. Fine.
Yeah. In fact, I'm also currently joined by my colleague Mohammad Ghazali. Ghazali, these are interesting set of meetings that are taking place. Just break it down for us. Give us the details of what exactly happened in these meetings.
See, everybody is right now obviously waiting for Prime Minister's meeting with President Trump. But before that, his close aides are also meeting the Prime Minister. And that shows that the Prime Minister and his entire visit to the United States is not just limited to his interaction with the President, but he's also keeping a close eye. And the External Affairs Ministry from India, the Prime Minister's office from India, was properly briefed and had been working on for months before Mr. Trump assumed the office on January 20th. And before that, all these meetings were getting scheduled that when the Prime Minister visits the United States, he'll meet all the close aides of Mr. Trump, Mr. Musk being one of them, Mr. Ramaswamy being the other, despite the fact that he recently stepped down from his role from the Department of Government Efficiency, a new department which was introduced under Mr. Trump. So, and his Indian lineage, or to say being an Indian origin, also brings him closer to the fact that the Prime Minister himself is meeting him. He's an influential voice there. So all this aligns with India's own interest, and in his foreign policy, when the Prime Minister is on the foreign land in the United States and he's meeting all the close aides. So that also kind of shows that, India has been practicing this soft diplomacy of public power, that our diaspora is there, or anybody who's remotely linked, connected, or being of Indian origin, gives that kind of comfort for the Prime Minister, for that person. And since he's considered close to Mr. Trump, so that also adds to the advantage of this trip for Prime Minister Modi.
All right, Mohammad Ghazali, thank you very much for joining us with all those details. In fact, it has been a fascinating discussion. Dr. Tara Karta, Brahma Chilani, and Glenn Carl, thank you very much for getting us your views. And I would have loved to continue this conversation. We are unfortunately running short of time. Thank you again for your valuable inputs.